So many organizations around the nation help preserve the living history of the warbirds and military aircraft, and we're proud and honored today to speak with Rick Paylor of the Commemorative Air Force, the Arizona chapter. And welcome to our program.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So am I. I mean, what we're seeing behind us is this beautiful C-47 aircraft. But I wanted to talk with you, sir, and have you explain to us the rich history of the CAF, and particularly here in Arizona.
Okay. The CAF was actually started in 1951 in Texas by some former Army Air Corps instructors who were crop dusting, and they said, all these planes are being destroyed after the war, scrapped out. Nobody's saving them. The Navy, the Air Force, nobody was interested in saving them for history. So they started buying these aircraft. So the goal from the start then was to find, restore, fly, and talk about that rich history of World War II and the people that built them, that serviced them, and flew them. And that's what we're about.
And it's interesting, folks, here in the Valley of the Sun in Mesa, Arizona, Falcon Field, you have, and I say this really simply and very honestly, one of the most amazing collections of aircraft, and right emblazoned on your flight shirt, the most beautiful B-17G that I think we've seen in a long time. Talk about sentimental journey.
It's an absolutely beautiful airplane. It is the genesis of our squadron here in the Valley. And now our squadron got big enough, it became a wing. And we started in 1977 with the purchase of that plane. It was donated to us by a new member, and we have restored it a couple of times. And we started a few years after that to fly it around the country to air shows and to sell rides on it to help pay for it, because it costs over $2,100 an hour to fly it.
Great organization, CAF, Commemorative Air Force, the Arizona Wing, and they are a wing, a flight wing. But I got to ask you this. We're talking today with so many people here at the Copperstate Fly-In about volunteerism and the term docent. I want you to tell the listeners and viewers what that really is.
Docent, it's a Latin term. It means a teacher of museum, basically. So typically people that lead tours in museums of all kinds are now typically called docents, D-O-C-E-N-T-S. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rick Paylor, Commemorative Air Force Arizona Wing. Thank you for your time, sir, and a most enjoyable journey down memory lane. We'll continue more here on airshowvid.com at the Copperstate Fly-In. Joining us here today is Dale Churchill with the Commemorative Air Force Arizona Wing. In the background, you see this iconic and beautiful C-47 aircraft. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having us.
You know, what we're seeing in the background, ladies and gentlemen, is amazing. And please, Dale, tell us a little bit about the history of the C-47 here.
Well, the C-47 was the workhorse of World War II. I believe it was Patton described it as that we couldn't have won the war without the combat rifle. I believe it was the Jeep and the C-47. It brought all the goods and supplies in from the U.S. and everything to help supply the war.
I understand this aircraft has an amazing history. You were telling us off camera. Describe that history as we're watching it today.
Oh, well, it was built as a C-47 at Long Beach plant, and went straight over to North Africa, and where it served through the North African War and into the Mediterranean, and dropped paratroopers and hauled supplies.
I heard some stories about this, and I wanted to get an expert like yourself to qualify it. It almost basically like this plane has been, I know it doesn't do that, but some people say it can actually land itself. That's what we've heard.
It's a big old gentle Cub. It's a multi-engine Cub. It's just a ball to fly.
Well, Dale, I want to thank you so much, and we do appreciate your time. And matter of fact, all the volunteers at the Commemorative Air Force, the Arizona Wing, we salute you. And thank you so much for your time today and talking with us about this most amazing aircraft.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
We continue now to talk more and see more of the amazing airplanes here from the Commemorative Air Force Arizona Wing here at the Copperstate Fly-In. In just a few minutes, I'll be fortunate enough to fly in this Boeing Stearman and let you all know what it's like to fly in a piece of living aviation history. Clear, clear.
I'm Skylar Shipley. This is a Vultee Valiant BT-13. It was built in 1942, and there were almost 12,000 of these built during the war, but now there are just a very small handful left. It's a very rare plane. As far as I know, it's the only one flying in Arizona. I've owned it for 3 years. It has a Pratt & Whitney R985 450 horsepower engine, fixed landing gear. It's often mistaken for an AT-6. But it's not. It's not related to the AT-6 at all. It was built by a different company, although they were fairly similar in time. This is an intermediate trainer. A cadet would go through 3 stages of training. Primary, which would be in a Stearman or another very basic type of airplane, often with a civilian contractor early in the war. Then they would advance to basic training. This is the plane they would fly in basic. It served with the Army and Navy both. So they would spend 11 weeks and 60 flight hours in this airplane focusing on 5 things: formation flying, night flying, cross-country, aerobatics, and what they called blind flying or instrument flying, learning to fly by reference to the instrument panel only. There was a black canvas hood in the cockpit that would fold up over the cadet so that he could only see the instrument panel. And that's how they would learn to fly by instruments, so they could fly in all kinds of weather. After they completed, if they completed basic training, they would then go on to the 3rd stage, which was advanced training. They would fly an AT-6, which had a bigger engine, retractable landing gear, and they would train for things like gunnery and mission-oriented things. And then they would, after completing that, they would get their wings and be sent to transition school to the type of plane they would be flying in combat, and then they'd be sent off to the war. And of course, many of them never returned. I didn't restore the airplane, but since I've owned it, I have done some work on restoring the cockpit to its original, authentic World War II condition, with exactly everything the way it would look, the way it came out of the factory. All these boxes right here, these are the original radio gear. They're not functional. those radios would not use a frequency band that's currently in use anyway. They are there just for display. But it's a very complicated system, as you can see. This is the transmitter, the receiver. This is your tuner, how you tune the frequency with that. These control the relays and the intercom and so forth. The whole thing ran on 600 volts DC, which was created by a dynamotor underneath the seat. Very complicated, heavy system, but it was state-of-the-art in 1942. Otherwise, the instrument panel is exactly the way it would have looked in 1942 when it came out of the factory. Here's the original pilot's checklist, complete with World War II pinup. Checklists were a very new thing back then. In fact, they called them a check-off list. And they weren't used with a lot of discipline back then the way they are now. I have also recreated what's called the Form 1. This is an administrative thing that the Army Air Corps used during the war. It's actually two different forms here. One is the Form 1 for the crew chief to fill in all the inspections and the servicing data, and then the Form 1A that the pilots fill in to record their flight time and who's on board each mission and where they land and so forth. These all then went to the company clerk for administrative purposes. So this, I have done a lot of research and recreated these forms exactly to be authentic, to go with the airplane, and they live in this little box right down here. We have the wartime service records of this airplane. It served at 4 different bases in California, and then it was sold in late 1944, before the war was even ended. It was sold off as surplus. We have very little record of what happened to it after that. We know it was registered as a civilian airplane in 1950. Then at some point it was dropped out of activity until 1995, when it was bought as a derelict hulk in Sacramento, California by an airline pilot who hired a top-notch mechanic to do this restoration on it in Half Moon Bay, California. And it took to the air again in '96, passed through 2 or 3 other different owners until I bought it 3 years ago.
You know, folks, that was just an amazing experience flying in a piece of living history, the Boeing Stearman. It's just an amazing flight. We flew around the airport and just got to see this entire fly-in, and it's just so incredible that I think everybody watching, hopefully one day you too can be part of this exciting aviation experience right here as we continue to cover this most amazing fly-in, the Copperstate fly-in, its 40th anniversary.